Thanks, Dean. My introduction to Dean Campuris has been a life-changing event, and I can't believe that any of you here haven't felt that experience as well. It has been one of the most positive things that has ever happened to me. And I'm delighted to be here. I've learned to love Little Rock. I've learned to love its people. Somebody asked me a couple months ago if I was going to get a second home, where would I get it? And I said, I think I'd get it in Little Rock. And they said, what? What are you talking about? I said, no, I think that would be where I'd like to go and just kind of spend some downtime and have a good time. And I really, truly believe that. This experience in getting to know all of you has just been unbelievable. You know, it was just less than 2 weeks ago that we installed this sculpture. It's a sculpture of Bill Clark. It was dedicated with President Clinton, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Governor Beebe, Mayor Stadola, Mayor Hayes. Dean was on the podium. Margaret Clark was on the podium. And it was really an exciting day. This is a sculpture called Steady. It's a portrait of Bill Clark and his dog, Chloe. It's the latest of all the public sculptures that I know of that have been put in Little Rock. It was a gift to the city and to the library by Bill Clark's widow, Margaret. I didn't know Bill, but I was thrilled as we were installing this sculpture to find out that this great city crew that we always have helping us knew who Bill Clark was. I decided that everybody knew who Bill Clark was, whether he's President of the United States or one of the guys that gets his hands dirty and helps us install a sculpture. He was a man of enormous generosity and a commitment to Little Rock and his friends. And this is the type of memorial that we like to do, and it's the type of thing that I think is important for cities to participate in. The other thing that it was a real privilege for me to see was how cathartic it was for the family to do this, and how important it was for them to know that they were continuing what their loved one, father and husband, had done his entire life. And this was their chance to show how they could give an exemplary example of friendship and devotion to Little Rock. So we start with that. I'm going to ignore these images as we go and just generally talk, and hopefully the images and I will finish at about the same time. We've not done this, so we'll just have to see how that works out. So you're going to, as we go through this, you're going to see work that this is all Little Rock artwork. And so this is something that'll maybe take your eye off of me as we go through this. Public art is generally works of art in any media that has been designed and executed with the specific intention of being placed and sited and staged physically where the public can always see it. And this is usually outdoors, but the public domain can also include interior sculptures and paintings if it is available to the public. But it is specifically designed really for public view. The range of it, of course, has unbelievable potential and is ever-changing. There's always something new coming up, and we just don't know what that's quite going to be. In modern times, basically in 1948, the United Nations, in their Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, said that everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of their community, to enjoy arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. Since that time, as one of our basic human rights, communities throughout the world have commissioned public art to create a sense of place of well-being for their communities. We know that public art has been placed throughout history. It was common from anything we've studied for rulers and governments to commission public artwork as a means of demonstrating their power, their wealth, and oftentimes as propaganda. I'm not going to go to other countries, but in the United States, just think of Washington, D.C. and the many pieces of public art that you've seen there. And then think of the many memorials that you see when you go through the Civil War battlefields. Some of the finest sculpture in the United States is in those battlefields. And think of another time during the Great Depression when 5,000 artists were put to work to help these artists out, and they created 225,000 works of art for this country through the Work Progress Administration, WPA. Go back to ancient Rome. Large architectural projects throughout ancient Rome were done for imperial glory. The Roman Colosseum, for example, was commissioned by Emperor Vespasian. Public statuary was widespread, and many of it is here for us to see today, both mythical and heroic. The ancient Roman culture was not really hot and happy about artists. They were very anti-intellectual. But they certainly understood the power of public art and the effectiveness in influencing their public's opinion about their civilization and their government. To look for civilizations that really honor the artists, we have to go to Greece or to Babylonia. During the Renaissance, visual art flourished in all the cities of Italy. And it was basically through the patronage of merchants and government officials. Cesare Borgia, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci earned steady commissions to murals, to sculpture. And perhaps the most famous of these that we know of was the Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo was commissioned to do the ceiling for Pope Julius II. In reviewing over the years public art commissions, and we as the National Sculptors Guild do proposals for about 1,800 commissions a year. When I was in Florence, I was just shocked to find out that the first public art commission competition, this is where artists are competing, was in 1329. And it was for the doors of the Battistero di San Giovanni, which was the baptistry of St. John in Florence, Italy. Andrea Pisano was awarded that commission. What was so fascinating to me is in the museum behind the Duomo, which is the cathedral in Florence that Michelangelo started, but was a slacker and never really finished. We have a museum there that shows not only the winner of Andrea Pisano, but it also shows the 5 artists who didn't win and these exquisite drawings they did for those doors. It just slayed me to realize that we're doing the same thing today that we were doing in 1329. Those doors were completed in 1336. There are 24 quadrifoil panels, and when you're ever there, I hope that you can look at them. The first 20 on the top are dedicated to the life of St. John, and then the lower 8 that takes it into the public realm and out of the religious realm are dedicated to the virtues of hope, faith, charity, humility, fortitude, temperance, justice, and prudence. Things we still are doing sculptures on to this day. There is, and I'm going to have to read this, there's a Latin inscription on the top of the door, Andreas Ugolini Nini de Piscis me fecit, AD 1330. And when you translate that, it says, Andrea Pisano made me in 1330. I love that. So, some of the grandest doors in all of history. Now, If any of you know this, I would love to have you tell me after this in the question and answer, but something tells me that maybe Italy was not the first place to hold a public art commission. And just maybe Marco Polo brought this idea back from the emperors of China as he brought back so many other things that we passed on to civilization. Well, Little Rock has long been filled with public art, and in being here over the last 15 years, I've started to notice that and discover that. And the sculpture that is probably the most prominent here is called the large standing figure Knife Edge by Henry Moore. Henry Moore lived from 1898 to 1986. And that sculpture may not be standing now, it may be put away temporarily. Stood originally, was standing in the Union National Plaza on Capitol Avenue. This artwork was commissioned in 1976 by the Little Rock's Metro Center Commission, and they placed it in 1978. They placed it on Main Street and Capitol Avenue. It was the centerpiece of the Metro Center Downtown Pedestrian Mall project. It is considered to be Arkansas's, if not the one of the top public sculptures that are located here. Sculpture is 11 feet 5 inches tall, weighs 1,200 pounds. It's not unlike many that we've recently placed. It was purchased for $185,000 and recently was appraised for somewhere between $3 and $5 million. All public art placements that I've discussed have one thing in common. And the one thing they share is common ground. Public art is sited and placed on common ground or public land. Common land has two specific purposes. The first is it makes possible for people to feel comfortable outside of their homes, their private homes, and their businesses, and therefore allows them to be and feel connected to a larger social society. The second thing that common land acts as is a meeting place for people. Today, communities provide common land in so many different ways, and they are, as Truman knows, they are pretty much taken care of by our parks and recreation departments throughout this country. They might be trails or parks or playgrounds or plazas or sanctuaries. Public land gives people an opportunity to relax, rub shoulders, and renew themselves. It may also provide venues for quiet thought, or it could provide dancing in the streets. These spaces become our city's outdoor rooms. Some of these spaces become holy ground. That may be because they are connected to a church or a religious center. It may be a square that is for something such as a veterans memorial. In any sense, the public will eventually understand this land and those squares to be sacred. There are other things that follow in much the same line, and it may be just something right off a path, a gateway, a garden. And those are sites where we do memorials to people, just like the Bill Clark Memorial. People who've died and have left something in our hearts that we think deserves an inscription or a memento that celebrates that person's life. And it becomes something that we ritually place something in. And by custom, those places and those spots of common ground become what we call hallowed ground. And really, a community is not healthy unless we have those spaces, and we have those memories, and we understand what is important in life. Over its history, Little Rock has established many common land venues. Some have been continually maintained and revered. Some of them have been forgotten. At the end of the Clinton administration, when I was just first getting to know Dr. Kampuris, a decision was reached to place and locate the Clinton Library here. And Dean took Denny and I on a walking trip that I spent more time looking for snakes than I did looking for what we were seeing. And we saw where all of this was going to go. The site of the library was in desperate need of revitalization. And it wasn't just the site of the library, but it was that area kind of surrounding the fringe areas of the site that also needed a little help. And so let's say that it was just a little bit rough around the edges. And the only thing that we had as a shining example was Heifer's International Headquarters, which would really set the stage for all the things to come. There was concern at that time, and it was being made clear to Dean as he was talking to the many people he was talking to, that there was concern that maybe there were some problems and we needed to do things to make this more appealing. And Dean knew that he had to figure this out. And so in 1998, when I was first talking to him, he was exploring what it would take to enhance the experience of the downtown. One of the avenues he was exploring was placing public art, and that's what he was talking to me about. I was thrilled to hear about everything else he was doing, but I was really interested in the public art placements he was talking about. And some of the questions that came up is, would these be considered to be too extravagant? Would they really benefit both the downtown, the Riverfront Park, and the library? What did people in Little Rock really think about that, and were they really willing to support it? Well, he determined that he really needed to find those answers out, and he decided in his own way that I would be the investigator. And he started setting up meetings, meeting after meeting, and they were one-on-one meetings pretty much. And I started asking people those questions and gathering information and sharing that with Dean as to what we really could do. In each conversation, it became apparent that there were really a number of issues of concern and that really had to be addressed, and I felt like we could address it with public art. And I jotted down at that time 5 issues, and in going through my files from those early years, here are the 5 issues we identified. The walk from the convention center to the library was a long one, and would people really go the distance? Would they make it all the way to the library, and then would they want to walk back? And would they do it a second time? The entry to the presidential library was hidden by an overpass. And what could be done to make that entrance more inviting and clear as an entrance? Many parts of the Riverfront Park really had no purpose, and they really didn't have any appeal. With the exception of 1 or 2 events that were staged each year in the park was totally underutilized. The infrastructure on the fringe of the library grounds was in desperate need of repair, and it needed to be first priority way before public art could even be considered. There was a consensus that the people had some fear for their safety, whether justified or not, when walking Riverfront Park, especially after twilight. From all these meetings, I determined, and really with the help of all the people I talked to, we determined that public art really could help and really could be influential in answering these questions. To the first question of that long walk. Well, using the European practice of placing a sculpture, fountain, or a landscape design every 20 yards so that you had the next thing to walk to that you wanted to see was a solution to that long walk between natural paths, which are already created, public squares, courtyards, and the common land that we were going to have people walk over. So there was a way of creating that and making that a better path that people would enjoy. So we started making plans to create new venues and enhancing the ones that were already existing. The placement of an important plaza and a sculpture roughly in the middle of that plaza at the entry to the library on the other side of that overpass would certainly help identify the entry and create a gathering place for people. The sculpture would give a strong and steady pulse to the plaza and thereby draw people to that entry. We had enormous help from the city landscape architect, Mark Webb, on this. And I think the solution was really a successful solution. We talked about sculpture, but I think the crowning glory to that entire installation was we found a place to put literally hundreds of tiles created by the children of Little Rock on the wall underneath that overpass. And it has created a delightful, wonderful entryway. Although the infrastructure improvements had to take priority, we determined that with really careful study, we could place artwork where those improvements were most needed, and we could give a refinement to those improvements that would make them even grander than we had anticipated. And then in regard to public safety, research had shown, and articles were evident, that public art was more than a picture on the wall. It actually was a crime prevention tool. Public art promotes a sense of community, it promotes creativity, it has a means of giving overall pride and engagement in public spaces. The Center on Policy Initiatives concluded that, and I'm going to read this, art, though subjective, is believed to contribute to quality of life. Public art work can provide a knowing sense that care has been spent into considering and revitalizing a space, serving to ultimately reverse any feelings of danger and a real reduction of crime and violence. Public art can provide that needed sense of exposure to a watchful eye. It's almost like when you're around public art, you're really not willing to break that window, because after all, the artists might just be coming down to check out their artwork at any time. A great commitment was made by this city to bring this library here and to improve the downtown. And from what I understand, over $800 million has been invested, both public and privately, into this River Market district. Public funding, however, was not available for public art. And so even though during the whole time we were exploring this, we had artists looking at and preparing ideas for how we might solve those problems and making designs and coming up with solutions, we really didn't know how we were going to fund it. We had defined two areas of artwork that we would place initially, and they were quality of life in Arkansas and using the subjects from Bill Clinton's Bridge to the 21st Century as our themes. The goal was to try to figure out a way of setting those themes and getting artworks placed to solve these problems and having it all done prior to the dedication or simultaneously to the dedication of the library. Well, time went on and it suddenly became clear that all of this design done on paper was probably not going to get done in time for the dedication. So what was the next strategy and what would we do? Well, for 3 or 4 years, we had been meeting with many of you and asking questions and getting your opinions, and we decided to invite you to a luncheon and ask your opinions again, but we took it one step further and really added one additional caveat. Would you not only give us your opinions again, but would you give us your money and help us pay for this? Well, we had a lovely luncheon, and we, during that luncheon, explained what we'd done, explained what our ideas were, and with the generous contributions of many of those people, we were able to fund 5 initial sculptures. With the vision of Jimmy Moses, we did an additional sculpture at the airport. So we ended up with 6 great sculptures, and it was a very energized and successful time. Besides the things we had done, we also had an amazing city staff, a city staff that stepped up at every opportunity to help us get this accomplished, that did just amazing things, that made dollars stretch and made things a success. We installed all of those sculptures in downtown in one day, just unheard of. Well, on a rainy day in November, it was November 18th, the library is dedicated on a cold and rainy day. But the week before, on a very sunny, nice day, we dedicated all those sculptures. And it was such a cheerful and wonderful event for the artists and for everyone involved. And there were many, many involved. And it had been a huge push because we didn't collect that money until May 1st, and we were installing those in September. We just don't do that in the sculpture world. It took Andrea 3 years to get those damn doors done, and we were doing it in 5 months. So, since that day in 2004, many things have happened, and we have had many generous contributions that have allowed us to do many more public artworks. Examples that you all know of are the Veterans Memorial at the Memorial Stadium called Stars and Stripes by Kathleen Karikoff. There's a smallish sculpture called Forever a Rose that's in the Forever Rose Garden by Denny Haskew that has created a lovely space on Riverfront Park that wedding after wedding occurs in. In fact, there's going to be a wedding this weekend while we're having the sculpture in the park. There's the piece that Jack Fleischauer gave shortly before his death in honor of his family called Together that Mark Lecklater did that in orange that sets the tone for the Peabody Park and the children playing underneath it. The sculptures go on, and there's so many others we could talk about, but those are just examples that I think you might know about. The funding for public art in Little Rock is now being augmented by another very successful program, and that's Sculpture at the River Market Show and Sale. And this coming weekend, not the weekend after, this weekend, we will have our 5th annual show. This is a show that features 44 artists from around the United States in a juried show. This year proved to me that the show is a total success. We have artists that have heard about this from other artists, and they are now sending in their applications, and we're able to truly jury this and pick out the best. There are 8 artists from Arkansas in this show. The profits from this show go to maintain the existing works we have and to purchase new sculptures. And in fact, over 20 sculptures have been purchased for the new Vogel-Swartz Sculpture Garden that is on the riverside of the Peabody. If you haven't been there, I hope you can go see it. We still have room for more sculptures in that garden, but we are filling it so much more quickly than I ever thought we would. And it's turned out to be really an award-winning type of garden. Well, how did this Sculpture at the River Market show come about? Well, I've tried to figure that out, and I have some ideas, but I think part of it was that Dean and Mary and others from Little Rock, as we started working on the initial sculptures for the Clinton Library and the Riverfront Park, I think that they came to Loveland. Loveland, Colorado is kind of the bronze sculpture capital of the United States. It has, Loveland has 3 major foundries, and it boasts 2,000 employees that work strictly in the sculpture industry. And they saw how wonderfully the sculpture industry had affected Loveland. And this sculpture show in Loveland, which is the largest sculpture show in the world, the proceeds from that go to purchasing public art for the city of Loveland. And Loveland has an unbelievable collection. Dean, on several occasions, said, how can we do this in Little Rock? And I had some answers, but I didn't want to tell him because I thought it might involve me. And so I kind of kept my mouth shut. But it finally got to the point, he says, well, John, I want you to help, and I want the National Sculptors Guild to participate in establishing a sculpture show in Loveland, Colorado. And he had people that he knew would help, people who can't say no to him any better than I can. And many of you are here right now. Well, I took this to the National Sculptors Guild and asked them if they would participate. And this was at our annual meeting in August of 2006. And they had turned down these opportunities to cities in the Los Angeles area and all over the country. They had never said yes to anything like this. And I was pretty sure they weren't going to say yes to this. But they surprised me. And they did say yes. And they said that they only said yes, they committed to have 100% attendance at the first show. And I know that the reason they said yes is because they had all become good friends of Mary and Dean, and they had all fallen in love with Little Rock. Little Rock was a really bright, fresh experience for them. And they took that message to the other members of the Guild, and they convinced them that this is something we ought to do and something we ought to participate in. And they sold that project to their own compatriots. And they rolled up their sleeves and they went to work, and they helped us establish a show and create a show that is for artists, and it's for art, and it's for Little Rock. And at the same point in time, we had an unbelievable, wonderfully talented group of people here in Little Rock that rolled up their sleeves, and they did the same thing. And they have now become a nonprofit and our board of directors here. The inaugural show was in October of 2006. The National Sculptors Guild was a co-sponsor for the first 3 years for the show to get on its feet. The show has continued for last year, and this is its 5th year, and I invite every one of you to come. The artists would love to talk to you, love to speak to you. We have 4 of our artists here today, and there is a synergy just having you here. This is the newest sculpture that we're going to install this next week. It's on a truck on its way here now. This is Boris. You might recognize him. And this is a sculpture by Dan Glantz. Boris is now going to be in the park 24 hours a day, 24/7. Boris might be joined by another Boris when he's on a leash with Dean, but this Boris is going to be in that park, in the Riverfront Park, 24 hours a day. And he will spread the word about sculpture around the world. I don't know how long Boris is going to stay up there, but I guess what I'd like to do is I'd like to have our National Sculptors Guild artists who are here to stand up. These people, have helped us from day one and in doing this show and have been committed to it. Michael is here and is on our board of directors here and is here in Little Rock and is just always there to help us. Denny, who's sitting in the back, is who introduced us to Dean and Mary, and C.T. Whitehouse, who has done more shows in this country than anybody I know, helped us figure this out. And Chapel, who is one of our dear friends, has been with us for all 5 years. They are from Wisconsin, California, Colorado, Arkansas. They're from around the country. So how did this show really come about? How did sculpture and public art in Little Rock really come about? I think we might say that it came about and it was initiated by the building of the Clinton Library, and that is certainly the easy answer. But I really have a different idea about how it came about. Dean mentioned the tragic loss of his daughter Anne, and it, I think, is the reason why we have this community enrichment here. They took a very difficult time and commissioned Denny Haskew to do, I wasn't going to get emotional about this, to do a sculpture called Love and Forgiveness. And that sculpture is this sculpture, and it is at St. Mark's Episcopal Church here. I think this is the message that sculpture gives. I think sculpture speaks to people. It speaks to people in so many different ways. It may not speak to you the same way it speaks to me, but that's what's so wonderful about public art, is public art is for all of us. It's for us to have art that we can't have ourselves. And I may be challenged by some pieces, and some pieces may not challenge me at all. But the fact that they're there and we can all share in it, and we can rejoice in it, and rub elbows around it, and dance in the streets with it, is really important. So I really think that the community enrichment that we have here in Loveland through public art, the recent community enrichment through public art, is a celebration of Ann Campuris. And I think that's how public art really works. So thank you so much for letting me speak to you today.
Thank you, John. I just asked Dean where Boris was going to be, and he said in the Vogel-Schwartz Sculpture Garden. Actually, Boris should be in the fountain at the Clinton Library, because that's where he hung out all the time. He also, in violation of every security and protocol, was the first and I think the only dog ever to make his mark in the Oval Office. Boris is quite traveled, and it'll be wonderful to see Boris in the park. That was a surprise. John, thank you. Let's open it up for questions. Got anybody have a question?
Well, Skip, I just want to say that maybe we should reconsider where Boris should be.
Well, Boris covered a wide path, so so wherever he is in the park, I can assure you Dean walked it, so Boris can go anywhere. Any questions about any from this? Jane, wait for the mic, Jane. There's a mic.
Oh, thank you. John, knowing that the past few years have been hard economically on a lot of people, has this affected the artist in any way?
It certainly has. And actually, it's affected our show here. It's a tough time for everyone. And these public art projects are basically construction projects. And the construction industry and the art industry certainly is suffering. We do public art projects all over the country, and most of our patrons and commissioning groups are cities and corporations. Cities are certainly hurting. Corporations are hurting in some instances, and they're just not able to do this. Our attitude is work harder, work longer, do better, create what people are looking for, and it works to some extent. But artists are suffering, and I think that we've seen our artist community probably shrink by anywhere from a quarter to a third. We certainly have seen galleries shrink by at least a third and maybe a half. There were 4 major galleries in Loveland, Colorado 2 months ago. There's now 1. And that's our gallery. And I don't like that. I want a gas station on every corner. And so we do see that. This is the time to step up and support your artists. And hopefully we'll provide you what will feed you and emotionally, and you'll find that. Just one other comment about that. I just worked with a publishing company out of Kansas. This is just, to me, a fascinating story that has discovered that their editor from 2 generations ago, their owner and editor, a Pulitzer Prize winner, was traveling Kansas and buying artwork from artists who were struggling and suffering through the Great Depression. And he was giving it to schools, both community colleges, and public schools. They came to me and said, we need to know what to do. We've just discovered that a college has just sold the collection he gave them for $6 million. And we want to know what we should be doing and how we should be doing this, because once schools find this out, they will all be selling their collections. Those pieces of artwork were purchased not because this man really thought they were wonderful, although they were purchased to keep artists working and alive. And it just shows what can happen in this world and how much revered artwork is. I'll stop at that.
Anybody else got any questions? Yes, sir.
Tell me briefly how you came to be into public art from being an attorney.
Well, that's a story longer than you want to hear, but I grew up in a little town and returned to that little town, and you know how it is when you go back home and they want you to be on lots of committees. But my great-grandfather had founded the university there, and my mother had been the chairman of the board of the symphony, the oldest philharmonic orchestra west of the Mississippi, for years. But the Philharmonic never had a home. And so it had a gymnasium at the college as a home, but it didn't really have its own home. And so I ran for public office to basically create a home for that Philharmonic orchestra. And in the process, discovered that there were so many artist groups that needed help. In fact, there were 23 of them, and I started talking to all of them to see what we really should build. And I totally got caught up in this art stuff. And so when things changed in my life, I turned to what really was feeding me and helping me, and that was art. I'd started out in architecture school. I'm almost totally colorblind. And my sophomore year, they advised me they would not graduate me because I was colorblind. Discovered it was really difficult to get into another architecture school at the end of your sophomore year. And so I switched to become a lawyer because that's what my family did. They were lawyers and doctors. So this was 20 years ago that we did this. I had a number of artists that we were avid art collectors, and I had a number of artists that would say, come and help us. I think Denny Haskew is the only one here that was a member of the original 7, but we said, okay, let's look at this and let's figure out what we can do. I did a business plan. I had done business plans for people till I was blue in the face, and they never worked. And this one worked. And I think it worked because I was fooling myself. I wanted it to work. And I think that's part of it. When you want something to work and be successful, then you'll make sure it does work, and it is successful. And one thing led to another. Our purpose was to take artists and from this level and take them to this level. That, quite coincidentally, is the same purpose we've approached the sculpture show in Arkansas. I met with numbers of Arkansas artists and talked to them about their needs, and we determined that one of the things this sculpture show could do, it could help Arkansas artists become familiar and work with artists from around the country. And friendships, through this show, friendships have developed. We've helped artists see better ways of submitting their work, better ways of marketing their work. And I think we've taken, even though there are some great, very successful artists and sculptors here in Arkansas, we've taken a body of artists here in Arkansas, and we've taken them from here and we've put them up here. And I think that's part of what the art world is all about.
6:30, you can come to the River Market to the preview party and buy a ticket and support this, because we have the opportunity to get more public art in this city. And I want to thank you, John, very much for being here. And Dean, I want to thank you for getting him here. And I want to thank all of you for coming and support the sculpture show this weekend. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.